Today I'm going to cover the new TCG Exclusive archetype in Duelist Nexus, Tistina. In this series, I'm going to be going over the cards individually and rate each card on a scale of 1 through 10, and then in a later video after playtesting and analysis, I'll revisit the same cards and give my opinion on if the card's rating has changed for the better or for worse. Let's begin. Tistina is a deck of aqua monsters of varying attributes with a flip opponent's monster face down gimmick and then sending face up cards your opponent controls to the graveyard. So the first card we're going to talk about is Sentinel of the Testina. If this card is in your hand or graveyard and you control a light Tistina monster, you can special summon this card. You can target one Tistina monster or one face down card you control, destroy it, and then add one Tistina card from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of Sentinel of the Tistina once per turn. This card is pretty good. It's a searcher, an extender, pretty much a starter, and it doesn't banish itself after using its own effect to special summon itself from the graveyard. Another great thing about this card is that it can destroy itself to enable the search effect. It's a pretty common restriction for cards with similar effects to destroy a card with a different name, but this card being able to destroy itself in any face down card allows for great flexibility. I'm going to give this card an 8 out of 10. It offers a lot for this archetype, and the reason I don't give it a 10 out of 10 is because it requires a light Testina monster to special summon itself, and that viability hinges on how many light Testina monsters we have access to. The next card we're going to talk about is Hound of the Tistina. If this card is in your hand or graveyard and you control a light Testina monster, you can special summon this card. You can only use this effect of Hound of the Testina once per turn. Testina monsters you control can attack directly while your opponent controls a face down defense position monster. This card presents either the win condition of the deck or an alternative win condition. This card is an extender if you control a light Testina monster. This card enables your Testina monsters to attack directly while your opponent has at least one face down monster. The fact it only requires your opponent to control at least one face down monster is pretty good. This effect isn't bad, but depending on how well the deck functions, it might not be the most thrilling effect you're trying to go for, but it is still a decent effect for closing games and attacking right through big boards for game. At the very least, this card is another extender that doesn't banish itself when it leaves the field, so I'm going to give this card a 6 out of 10. Its secondary effect doesn't generate too much advantage at this time. The next card I'm going to review is Demigod of the Tistina. If you control a Tistina card, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then you can add one Tistina spell trap from your deck to your hand. During your opponent's turn, if you control Crystal God Tistina, quick effect, you can change as many monsters your opponent controls as possible to face down defense position. Then you can send all face up cards your opponent controls to the graveyard. You can only use this effect of each effect of Demigod of the Tistina once per turn. This card is amazing. It can special summon itself while you control any Testina card, offering a wide range of flexibility. On summon, it adds a Testina spell trap, which is really good. This card's built-in interruption is massive. This card is a light Testina that can special summon itself onto the field, and that will enable the smaller Testina monsters to special summon themselves onto the field as well. Despite it being only able to activate its quick effect during the opponent's turn, it's still a potent effect that when timed well, it could shut down your opponent completely. Also, something I want to point out is that it sends face-up cards your opponent controls to the graveyard, which includes, of course, links and also spells and traps. This type of removal alone can get rid of many boss monsters as well. A lot of archetype boss monsters usually are immune to targeting and destruction, or both, so the fact this card does a non-target send to the graveyard is wonderful. I'm going to give this card a 9 out of 10. It being a quick effect only on the opponent's turn is the only downside. If it was a quick effect on either player's turn, I think it would be very strong given how free it can summon itself. So I would say it is a pretty fair downside. And the next card is Crystal God Testina. During your main phase, you can change as many monsters your opponent controls as possible to face down defense position. Then you can send all face-up cards your opponent controls to the graveyard. If this card and its owner's possession is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can change as many monsters your opponent controls as possible to face down defense position. Then you can send all face-up cards your opponent controls to the graveyard. You can only use each effect of Crystal God Testina once per turn. This is the main boss monster of the deck, and I gotta say it does feel a bit underwhelming. So far, this is the only Testina monster that cannot special summon itself onto the field, so it's kind of bricky when you draw it. And unlike the Demigod, this card can only flip your opponent's cards during your turn, and it's not a quick effect either. Although if this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, it will flip your opponent's monsters face down and send other face-up cards they control to the graveyard, which isn't bad, but it gives your opponent a lot of time to out this. I'm going to give this card a 5 out of 10. It's too bricky, and both its effects are just not reactive enough, and your opponent will have time to deal with it. The next card we're going to look at is Divine Domain by Tistina. This is the field spell of the deck, and during the main phase, you can send one Tistina monster from your deck to your graveyard. Then, if your opponent controls 3 or more face-up cards, you can special summon one Crystal God Tistina from your hand or deck. You can only use this effect of Divine Domain by Tistina once per turn. If this card in your field zone is destroyed by your opponent's card effect, you can special summon one Tistina monster from your deck or graveyard. I think this is a really good field spell, and it will be better depending on the next wave of Tistina cards. This card is a foolish burial for your monsters, and since they can special summon themselves from the graveyard if you control a light Tistina monster, this effect is a great effect on the field spell. What I do like as well is that it gives you going second options to summon a Tistina from the deck. If your opponent negates and destroys this card, you get to summon a Tistina from deck as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the last effect isn't a hard once per turn. I'm going to give this card an 8 out of 10. It has great targets to send to the graveyard currently, but sending those targets won't do much unless you control a light Tistina. The next card is Breath of the Testina, continuous spell card. During your main phase, you can normal summon one Testina monster in addition to your normal summon set. You can only gain this effect once per turn. You can target one face-up monster you control, or if you control a light Testina monster, you could target one face-up monster on the field instead, change that monster to face-down defense position, then add one Testina card from your deck to your hand, except Breath of the Testina. You can only use this effect of Breath of the Testina once per turn. This card is amazing. I really like cards that grant you an additional normal summon. I always feel like that's very strong. Being able to flip face down any monsters if you control a light is great for baiting out negates or disabling any pesky monsters on the field that may have some kind of floodgate. This card searches 2 even if you flip down your own monsters, which is very good. I'm going to give this card an 8 out of 10. And the reason it is not a 10 at this time is because the potency of this card does hinge on the next wave of support. And the last card on this review is Signs of the Tistina. This is a continuous trap card. Its effect reads: activate this card by targeting one face-up monster on the field. Special summon this card as an effect monster. Aqua Light, level 10, attack 0, defense 0, with the following effect. This card is also still a trap. During your opponent's turn, when that target leaves the field, destroy this card. During your opponent's turn, when this card leaves the field, destroy that target. This card can be a little confusing to read at first, because what does it really do for the deck? It does offer a way to have a light Testina monster on the field, but it's simply too slow. And I feel like its removal effect is just too slow as well. I don't think we'll be seeing this card have too much play at this time. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. It does offer a light Testina to help the deck have that body on board, but that seems to be the only really good thing it has going. I think this archetype has some great cards going for it right now. These first 7 cards are good, but it's not able to really be a deck on its own just yet. The deck really needs a light Testina on the field to really start generating more advantage, and as of right now, we really only have 2 light Testina monsters, not counting the trap, and only Demigod is able to summon itself onto the field. I think the other problem this deck has is that its gimmick is flipping things face down, which is good, but there is no advantage being generated from doing this. As of right now, the deck is really flipping monsters face down so it can attack directly if Hound is on the field. The deck doesn't have much removal, and ideally, you wouldn't want to leave monsters for your opponent to flip back up again, especially if it's a strong boss monster of some kind. I think the deck should get a Tistina card that says, when 2 or more monsters your opponent controls are flipped face down, target one card on the field and destroy it. Or when a monster your opponent controls is flipped face down, you can draw 1 card. Just something that gives you more of a reason to flip monsters face down rather than just using it as a stun tactic. I'm not saying if this deck received those sort of cards, it's going to be tier 1, but it's a start to an idea. Another light monster that can be easily summoned would do wonders for this deck. I really think that requirement can hinder this deck's ability and make the rest of the cards feel bricky if you can't get a light Testina on board. I really am looking forward to the next wave of cards for this deck. They'll have to release pretty bonkers support cards if this deck is going to make its way into the meta at all. The next card review video for this deck won't be out for a while, since I would really have to wait for the next wave and some playtesting to gauge the potency of these cards for this deck. That's all for this video. Leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you for watching.